That revolution in modern American historiography upended perhaps the deepest truism that shaped, and to some extent still shapes the field, namely that the mid-20th century was dominated by a liberal consensus, one born of the New Deal's culture of unity, solidified by America's triumph in World War II, reinforced by broad bipartisanship during the Cold War period that spanned the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy administrations, one that was embodied in the triumph of the African American civil rights movement, at least classically defined, and one that was ultimately undone, the argument went, by the supposed excesses of the 1960s, Dionysian counterculturalists, self-styled revolutionaries in the New Left and the Black Power movement, and meddling bureaucrats whose largesse aided and abetted the destructive social and cultural revolutions of the 1960s, ultimately leading to the rise of a new right that spoke for the alienated middle Americans calling for order and longing for a rollback to the antediluvian moment sometime on or before January 1st, 1960. In this still influential narrative of post-Second World War II American history, 1968 stands in the middle. It's the threshold. It's the turning point. It's the crossroads. It's the moment of unraveling, the beginning of the twilight of common dreams. The contours of the historiographical turn that has upended this understanding of the liberal consensus are well known to most of us by now. Anti-liberalism has a long and deep history. Even in its supposed heyday, the New Deal and its coalition was fractured and fractious. New Deal liberalism, even at its peak, had deep currents running through it, opposed to African American civil rights, opposed to the extension of the social welfare state. Indeed, the New Deal, as Ira Katz-Nelson has maybe very provocatively summarized it, was as much a strange marriage between South Africa and Sweden as it was a moment of social democratic expansion. In other words, anti-liberalism and liberalism were intertwined in fundamental ways. We now know that conservatism in its various manifestations has a deep history in the 20th century, in the 1940s, the 1950s, and 1960s, and laid the groundwork for the legitimation of the market, of privatization, and of individualism. We now know that there was never a civil rights consensus to speak of, that despite the celebration of America's integrationist moment, that it was short-lived and adhered to by few. That among whites, North and South, for most of the 20th century, the demand for racial equality was largely met by indifference or aggressive and violent opposition or outright hostility. We also know that there was seldom a bright line in the civil rights movement between separation and integration, between nonviolence and self-defense, between the movement of Martin and the movement of Malcolm. So with this revisionist picture of post-Second World War II American domestic history in mind, how does 1968 matter? Did the dream of integration die with King's assassination? No. Did the prospect of unity in the Democratic Party die with RFK's untimely death? No. Did liberalism unravel with Richard Nixon's narrow victory in the election of 1960? No. Did all of these movements, all of these political impulses were shaped by larger changes that were remaking the United States and the world. And I'm just going to mention a few of them before I wrap up. First was the profound, but still in the 1960s, unrecognized transformation of the global economy. The 1960s were the dawn of the regime that scholars have somewhat unsatisfactorily labeled neoliberalism. And we need to think about the social movements and the politics of the 1960s in that context. Secondly, the politics of the 1960s and the culture and the social movements of the 1960s were shaped by a global impulse, one that was shaping the economies around the world towards segmentation and fragmentation. A process that gave political actors at the time the illusion of liberation through individual expression and consumption while masking the larger economic processes and inequalities that market fragmentation was at the same time reinforcing. Next, we need to think about 1968 in the context of a widespread global delegitimation of authority, a challenge to all sorts of institutions, religious, political, social, and cultural, coming from all over the place at the same time. We need to think about this in terms of the anti-government rhetoric of both the American right and the left, but we also need to think about it in terms of the delegitimation of social welfare, the delegitimation of the state in its various forms worldwide, and the delegitimation of the modernist project writ large. Fourth, we need to think about 1968 in the context of a resurgence of local, regional, racial, and ethnic particularisms, not just in the United States, but in the world. Sometimes these came in the form of anti-colonialism, sometimes they came in the form of group separatisms, whether in Harlem, Barcelona, Brittany, Aberystwyth, or Okinawa. And it's only by stepping away from the narrow histoire sentimentale that has shaped our reading and interpretation of 1968 and towards a larger, global, transnational framework that ultimately I think we can make the most sense out of the year that shook the world.